So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the CRISP Spring Virtual Partners Meeting. John Thompson, the Catskill Regional Invasive Species Partnership Director. You should be seeing the agenda on the screen in front of you. Please introduce yourself in the chat, as I mentioned earlier, with your name, your job title, and what organization you represent, so that we know who's here today, and it helps Sarah when she's doing the minutes for the meeting. Also, please mute yourselves, as feedback and background noise can interfere with others who are speaking. And just so you know, closed captioning is available at the bottom of your screen. And as you can see from the agenda, I'll give some updates on CRISP. Chris Zimmerman from the Nature Conservancy will give a presentation on forest regeneration, which I'm really looking forward to. We'll have updates from the CRISP working groups and partners, partners will have the opportunity to give updates and make announcements for the upcoming season. So I'll start with, well, first I wanted to introduce our newest member of the CRISP team. That's Sammy Delaney, who you should see on your screen. Sammy started in January. She was one of the Catskill stewards, was the head Catskill steward most recently. Do you want to say a few things, Sammy? I know that you've been working on events for the summer, working on the volunteer database that we have.
Yep. So I've been working on posting events and such, as well as reaching out to some colleges for interns and more volunteers. So I'm just really excited to get the ball rolling for everything.
We're excited to have you on board. And yeah, feel free, anyone that's on the call, if you want to collaborate on volunteer events, to reach out to Sammy or me. And we definitely want to get people out on the ground and people volunteering and helping us out in the field. So there should be a lot of opportunities for that this summer and through the season. So I'll start the agenda in a minute by giving a few updates from CRISP, and then we'll have the presentation from Chris Zimmerman. As I mentioned, we'll do some updates from the CRISP working groups and partner updates and announcements, and there's opportunity to add anything into the agenda at the end. And at the bottom of the agenda, I put the next meeting date that we're planning, which is June 11th. So with the CRISP updates in 2024, first I should mention that we're working on the annual report, and that's almost complete, so it should be out pretty quickly. And I'll give some of the highlights from that report right now. During 2024, the CRISP aquatic and terrestrial strike teams surveyed a total of 3,408 acres of water bodies and uplands and managed a total of 219 acres. The total area surveyed was a decrease over 2023, while the area managed was up 24% from 2023. One new invasive species that was reported that Meredith talked about at our last meeting was the fishhook water flea, which was found in the reservoirs. The aquatic strike team surveyed a total of 3,568 acres of lakes and ponds and 50 miles of rivers and creeks. Working with our partners, we managed to pull hundreds of pounds of invasive plants in 2024. The team focused on pulling invasive water chestnut, European frogbit, and yellow floating heart. The CRISP terrestrial invasive species team surveyed 1,454 acres, found 15 acres of target invasive species, and managed 4 acres of target invasive species across 134 properties. The CRISP team began experimental treatment of beauty bush with buckthorn bags, and we began treating a new infestation of yellow archangel. The In 2024, we identified one new infestation of Japanese hops, one new infestation of yellow archangel, as I mentioned, one new satellite population of pale swallowwort, three new infestations of mile a minute, and one new infestation of princess tree, and also one new infestation of yellow groove bamboo. The beech leaf disease nematode has spread incredibly quickly through the CRISP region. 2022, we only had beech leaf disease in a couple locations in Sullivan County, but now it's been found in all of the counties of CRISP except for Schoharie County, which I'm expecting we'll find a report. We'll hear of a report from there soon. So we have information on our website about beech leaf disease. It's important that people know how to recognize it and how to report it through IMAP invasives, or take a picture of the leaves and the banding, the symptoms of beech leaf disease, and you could send it to us at CRISP. Last year, we did a total of 1.5 acres of restoration projects. We maintained them at Thorn Preserve and the Catskill Visitor Center, and we also started a restoration project at the Ashokan Rail Trail. In 2024, we led a total of 35 events for 791 participants. 21 trainings were offered for identification, reporting, early detection, control and prevention of invasive species. Other programs raised awareness about spotted lanternfly, beech leaf disease, and other emerging species. And during the year, a number of organizations signed the CRISP Cooperation Agreement, which we've been talking about in these meetings. Partners are agreeing to support the mission of CRISP in performing invasive species management. They get points on the RFP proposals. They may be considered to be nominated for the CRISP Steering Committee. And we had the following organizations sign on in 2024. Adirondack Research, Flying Trillium Gardens and Preserve, Greene County Soil and Water Conservation District, the Lake Association of White Lake, Sullivan County Soil and Water Conservation District. And in 2025, the Conadaruga Lake Improvement Association has signed the agreement. So thanks to all of them, and we're looking forward to working with everybody this season and into the future. And if you're interested in the agreement, we have it posted on our website. As I mentioned before, Sammy Delaney started as a volunteer coordinator. And say hello to Sammy when you get a chance. And we also awarded this year for the 2025 RFP award that went to the Otsego County Conservation Association for their proposal Detect, Delegate, and Develop a Multi-Tiered Approach to Invasive Management. For the project, OCCA will perform early detection and rapid response for CRISP Tier 1 and Tier 2 aquatic invasive species and a few terrestrial invasives. In addition, they'll be developing a training program for local highway departments and officials. And I don't know, Jeff O'Hanley, if you wanted to say anything else about that.
I think you got it, John, pretty well. We're in the process of getting started now and trying to assemble our team, and we're looking forward to getting rolling.
And I'll get you a contract soon.
Yep.
As soon as I can. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, we're looking forward to working with you folks again this year. I could also report we've hired 2 of our strike team members so far, and we have an offer out to 1 other person. We have 2 more vacancies, hoping to get those filled very, very soon. And get those people started. We're looking at a starting date of May 21st. So coming up in a couple months. We have exciting news as of yesterday. We acquired an eDNA sampler, and we've been working with DEC, other PRISMs, and other partners to establish collection protocols and the sampling plan for this season. And we're planning to do sampling for invasive species in the upper Susquehanna watershed. Sarah, do you want to say anything in addition to that, or just say yay?
Yeah, mostly just yay. Super excited. And yeah, if anybody else has been looking at maybe doing eDNA sampling, I'm so excited I can't speak. I apologize.
Yes.
Please send us an email and we can talk about because we got it so we can do our own sampling, but also working with partners is a huge priority for us. So super excited.
Great. Yeah, that's a really good point, Sarah. Yeah, we have our own sampling we'd like to do, but we'd also like to collaborate with others that we could do sampling, or we could help people do eDNA sampling into the future. So then I could mention we have a number of programs scheduled for 2025. We'll be leading volunteer work days at the Ashokan Rail Trail once again. We'll be posting registration links for those programs on our website under events. I think those Sammy's working on getting those up really quickly. The next work day that we have coming up is Earth Day, April 22nd at the Ashokan Station Trailhead of the Ashokan Rail Trail. Also, I just want to mention, as I did at the steering committee, some important conferences that are coming up, including the New York Invasive Species Expo is September 14th through the 16th. The Upper Delaware River Rendezvous will be held October 15th through 16th. The CERM conference this year is going to be October 21st. 23rd. So those are good opportunities to meet with other folks, to do presentations. If you have some information that you could share, it'd be great to have more information about invasive species available, especially at the Upper Delaware River Rendezvous and the CERM conference. If you could do a presentation or a poster, those would be great to do to share some of the great work that you're doing in both understanding invasive species and also management. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I don't know if anyone had any questions. I can't see the chat. But we can move on to the next part of our program. So Chris, you could start sharing when you're ready. And for folks listening, if you have a question during the presentation, please enter it in the chat. We'll also give a little opportunity at the end of the presentation for some questions. And with that, I'm happy to introduce Chris Zimmerman, who will present our New York's Forest Poised to Regenerate, Challenges and Opportunities to Establish Forest Regeneration in a Changing Climate. Chris is the Forest Regeneration Strategy Lead for the Nature Conservancy in New York, and he's been working on forest conservation in New York for over 20 years. So I'm really looking forward to his presentation. Are you able to share, Chris?
Yeah, John, I guess I was just wondering if you could, I think I could do this, but I think you would be better positioned to do this. If you could just remind the membership just the development of the working group around forest regeneration and how that came about within the newest kind of work plan.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and we'll have an opportunity, I think I've done on the agenda right after your talk to talk about the working group. But to go back a few years to where we did our strategic planning, our group concept mapping planning that we did, if you remember, a lot of you participated in it, so hopefully you remember. So we asked for submissions on actions or ideas that were important to put forward in the CRISP region on ways that we could better manage the CRISP region and better collaborate on things. One idea that came up that was ranked as being very important and also very feasible was to try to look at the impact of invasive species on forest regeneration in relationship to the other aspects of forest regeneration. And I think it's pretty well known that we don't have a lot of regeneration in some areas of the Catskills. So trying to understand when we're restoring these ecosystems, that in a lot of places it won't just be important to remove the invasive species, but it will also be important perhaps to do plantings and protect those plantings from deer. There's a lot more that we could do out in the field to try to improve the health of the forest. And so since we're out there, we want to do the best that we can in trying to protect these forests and making them more resilient into the future.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I guess that's like, I guess I'm super excited about that development, that the CRISP members through that survey really identified, our abilities for us to regenerate as a top priority in the new formation of this working group. So I'm really excited about that and about that opportunity to collaborate with all of you and partner on this issue that I've been working on for quite a while. So as John indicated, I work for the Nature Conservancy. I'm based out of our Albany office. I've been with the Nature Conservancy for approximately 22 years. Worked quite a bit in the Catskills, so member of the CRISP steering committee and engaged with CRISP over a large portion of that time, around 15 years. And this issue around forest regeneration has been something that has been a consistent challenge across kind of my tenure with the Nature Conservancy.
And just sorry to interrupt you, Chris, but Meredith put in what the goal of that forest regeneration working group is.
Excellent, thank you.
And actually the statement from the group concept mapping.
That's super helpful. And so, in thinking about how I was going to pull together this kind of presentation of this body of work that I have over approximately like a 15 to 20 year period of time, I was trying to get a sense of like where my journey started. So it dates back to kind of 2010, wherein a colleague of mine, Becky Shire, and I worked on a report on the status of forest regeneration. So our Catskill Mountain Forest Conservation kind of planning team really identified forest regeneration as a potential kind of threat or challenge of our abilities for us to kind of bounce back, but we really didn't have any good data on the kind of status of regeneration at that time. So Becky and I worked on this report, and we found at that time that about half of the forest within the state, didn't have adequate forest regeneration to regenerate. And so that kind of really led to a number of different projects that I've worked on over the last 15 years. So that kind of like leads to a roadmap of what I'm going to kind of talk about today. So I want to start off by just providing some basic background, some level setting information for everyone. I know that there's like multiple different kind of disciplines within the CRISP membership. So just give some basic information about um, forest regeneration. And then I want to tell you about a study that we completed in 2020, mapping out the status of forest regeneration and basically showing how we still have a major problem. Then I'm going to touch upon like why we have this kind of issue or lack of regeneration, and then specifically highlight kind of challenges around high deer herbivory and invasive plants. And then I want to tell you a little bit about an on-the-ground project that I worked on, a forest restoration demonstration project with Meredith Taylor and New York City DEP on forest regeneration. And then I'm going to really lightly touch upon these implications to forest carbon sequestration. And then lastly, kind of roll up potential opportunities to kind of address these issues, kind of provide an overview of the Family Forest Carbon Program. This is a program that I'm currently working on and how it might assist private forest landowners in addressing forest regeneration challenges. And so at the end of each of these sections, I'll kind of pause for questions. I think we have around 40 minutes, so it'd be great to kind of get questions at each one of these stages of the presentation to kind of make it more interactive. So what is forest regeneration? Forest regeneration is the process of renewing tree cover by establishing young trees after the previous stand or forest has been disturbed in some way. So I'll be talking today a lot about the components of regeneration. So one important piece is just to understand that we often talk about tree seedlings, which are less than 1 inch in a diameter at breast height. So those could be covering the forest floor. And they are seedlings that have germinated and have established. Tree saplings are tree stems that are greater than 1 inch in diameter at breast height up to about 5 inches. So in the picture down here below, you can see the forest floor is covered with tree seedlings, and then you see tree kind of saplings in the kind of mid-story. And so I'll talk about basically, are these, seedlings and saplings present across New York State, and what are some of the challenges in getting them established? And so why is forest regeneration even important? It's critically important towards the ability of our forests to kind of bounce back from disturbance. So it's a key attribute of resilience. And so when we think about, forest resilience, we think about our forests well connected in the landscape, how fragmented is a particular area. Ample tree regeneration needs to be in place to bounce back from disturbances, keep our forest. Another attribute is that our forests have diversity, both in its structure and in tree species, and that generally stresses are minimal. And so the figure to the right basically just shows a diverse kind of structure with abundant regeneration, both in seedlings and saplings in the understory, that if the overstory was disturbed, that forest would be able to recover. And so I touched upon kind of disturbance and how important that is in when we think about the dynamics of our forest in regeneration. So first, I just want to talk a little bit about forest disturbance and how important that is in kind of shaping the structure of our forest, but then also how that leads to potentially our forest kind of regenerating to recover. And then a little bit about forest stand dynamics. So why is disturbance so important? So it is happening all the time, essentially, within our forest. It's a process that creates light within the forest understory and space for plants and tree seedlings to be recruited into the overstory and grow. The disturbance, the intensity and the frequency and the extent of those disturbances really kind of shape how our forest is composed of different species, but then also the structure, and then also what types of regeneration we might see. So the most common form of disturbance in our forest is just natural mortality. So this would be kind of single tree forming kind of gaps. An individual tree dies, and a small opening is created from which younger trees can then populate. More intense storms might be blowdowns, windstorms, such as a hurricane. And so that might have greater intensity and extent, but its frequency is relatively low. Certainly, this group is tuned into forest pests and pathogens, so impacts from emerald ash borer, hemlock woolly adelgid, kills trees in the overstory and creates gaps, and from which regeneration can be released if it's present in the understory. And then lastly, timber harvest activities certainly are fairly frequent in the landscape, and their intensity kind of varies, as well as the extent of those harvests within a stand. And so those are also opportunities where our forests need to kind of regenerate. So this forest stand dynamic kind of model to the right is basically kind of a simplification of kind of forest succession over time after a kind of a larger disturbance. And this is adapted from a publication or book by Oliver and Larson in the 90s. And so they really recognize kind of like four main stages, kind of this stand initiation stage right after a disturbance. So, a fairly intense disturbance, such as kind of a blowdown, it's likely that, or a clear-cut timber harvest. After a blowdown, it's likely that some of the trees would be remaining. That leads into kind of a stem exclusion phase. So at this point, there's very little light reaching the forest floor. So we really wouldn't expect to see too much forest regeneration in this phase. This is a forest that's potentially 50 to 60 years old. And then individual trees are starting to be crowded out and thin and starting to die, kind of the more kind of codominant species. What I'm going to be focusing on today is this phase of understory reinitiation, and as a forest kind of ages and multiple age classes start to form. So this understory reinitiation phase, I think this is where a lot of our forests are at within the Catskills in New York State. A lot of our forests are 80 to 100 years old. Trees are starting to die and canopy gaps are starting to form. And so there is the potential and light availability for seedlings and saplings to become established in the forest understory under these conditions. So I'm going to be really focused on these kind of two conditions today. And so within those conditions, there are, and as we think about disturbance, there are multiple kind of like limiting factors to the ability of forest regeneration to get established. So a resource that I highly recommend is the Forest Regeneration Handbook. Jeff Ward with the Connecticut Experimental Station is the primary author, but I know that Peter Smallage with Cornell Cooperative Extension, our lead forester in the state of New York, is also an author on this. So they really put together a great guide on forest regeneration. So I highly recommend checking that out. They really identify kind of abiotic factors and biotic factors that limit the ability of forest regeneration to get established, but then also become recruited into the overstory. So abiotic factors might be, precipitation, certainly site index and soil quality, the amount of sunlight hitting the forest floor. Biotic factors, as you would suspect, are deer herbivory, other competing vegetation, such as invasive plants, and forest pests and pathogens. As we take into consideration these kind of like abiotic factors, one critical piece that kind of limits the ability of a seedling to become recruited is the amount of sunlight. And so many of you probably are familiar with the concept of shade tolerance. So as we think about the amount of sunlight coming through the canopy and how big kind of the canopy gaps are, we can think about shade intolerant species such as potentially aspen or pin cherry, potentially tulip poplar depending on the region, mid-tolerant species such as oaks, so they need moderate amount of sunlight, and then also shade tolerant species that require less light to be recruited, such as sugar maple or beech or hemlock. And so the regeneration handbook does a great job of really kind of highlighting all these different factors. So I'm going to pause there, John. Is there any questions about just some of this basic information as I kind of step into the next section of the presentation?
Yeah, if anyone wants to unmute themselves, then if Chris is comfortable with that, we can do that. Otherwise, you could enter it in the chat. I could mention that Mark Wolf asked me about where beech leaf disease was on our website, so it's under updates. So I put a link there so people could look that up. And just to point out, Chris, I was looking at the shade tolerant species specifically. Hemlock, of course, has Hemlock woolly adelgid. Beech now has beech leaf disease. Those are two trees that are both shade tolerant, but also highly impacted by forest pests and diseases.
That is a great point, John. And so these biotic factors that are present and emerging are certainly going to be important factors in shaping how our forests are basically being impacted through disturbance, but then also recovering. So that's a great segue to this most recent analysis that I completed with Jeff Corbin at Union College, again, Becky Shire and Shannon Fluhl. And we wrapped this up in around 2020. And we took a second look at, the New York's forest and the regeneration. And are they at risk of regeneration failure? And so we had two primary questions that we were looking at. We wanted to kind of assess the capacity of New York's forests to regenerate by forest type across the state. And we wanted to develop a map depicting the locations at risk of regeneration failure. And so we utilized a protocol called the Regeneration Security Indicated Protocol. So we did not replicate what we did in 2010. We used a new method that was developed by Lance Vickers and Will McWilliams in a publication that they developed in 2019. And so Will McWilliams worked for the Forest Service in the Forest Inventory and Research Unit for a number of years. Will's now retired, but he was a real leader in thinking about forest regeneration and really helped to kind of foster and promote the collection of additional forest regeneration data on our forest inventory and analysis plot. So really kudos to Will for being really inspirational for this work and kind of previous works as well. So Will worked with Lance to develop this kind of new and kind of novel approach to assessing regeneration and how we think about the reliability of a seedling to be recruited into the overstory, but then just the security of our regeneration and advanced regeneration. So we applied their methods to 2014 U.S. Forest Service Forest Inventory and Analysis plots. So for those that don't know, the U.S. Forest Service has this network of plots across the eastern United States, one about every 6,000 acres. And these forest inventory plots have kind of subplots that look at forest regeneration in different height classes. And we were really selecting forest plots that were generally in a condition that was capable of having understory regeneration. So in reinitiation. So we were looking at stands that were approximately, 60 years and older in age. And so they really had the conditions to which that we would start to see advanced regeneration. And so when I talk about advanced regeneration, this is basically seedlings and saplings that are present in a forest stand that is starting to go through that understory reinitiation phase, and that we're starting to see some gaps forming. And so one of the kind of the great novel things that Lance and Will really kind of tackled within their publication and developed a method is thinking about a reliability index for regeneration and reproduction. And then they weighted basically seedlings based on their height um, and their ability to be recruited into the overstory to kind of really meet forest regeneration goals. And so we utilize this indices to basically determine are our forests kind of meeting these regeneration goals, which I'll share. So essentially, tree seedlings here that you see that are greater over than 10 feet high or 3 meters, or approximately 2.5 inches dBH centimeters, so about an inch, it's a probably 100% probability that they'll be recruited into the overstory because they're well established, greater than an inch in diameter. Whereas a seedling that, let's say, is 30 centimeters in height, which would be about a couple feet, 2 feet, has only like a 20% probability of being recruited. So you need a lot more of those small seedlings to be recruited. These larger, kind of what I would call saplings, it's likely that they're make it. They're already above competing vegetation and above that deer herbivory. So I thought this was a great approach, and that's why we kind of shifted methodologies. And another thing they did was to establish forest regeneration targets for each of the forest types that we have in New York. And so this was also kind of a novel concept to have these kind of like targets for each forest type, and then also have kind of an endpoint of which to think about. So we could think about having kind of like what I would call smart objectives. So we can have a time frame from which what stem density do we need over what time frame. So I really just want to point your direction. So this is the amount of forest inventory analysis plots by forest type, and then the associated target and endpoint, which is critical for assessing kind of how we're going to explain the results. So kind of our northern hardwood forest, which is maple beech birch, this is our most abundant forest type across New York State. There was around 1,100 plots that we looked at this. Based on kind of forest stocking tables in the literature, Lance and Rill and associated authors determined that we need around 400 stems per acre at the year kind of 35 after disturbance. So around like 1 to 2 inches in diameter at that period of time, up to 4 inches in diameter at 35 years. To really be able to have a full forest fully recover and become fully stocked. So kind of our target is 400 stems. So similarly, oak hickory group, which is the second most abundant forest type across the state, we looked at 365 plots. Similar target objective at 20 years, trees grow a little faster in the oak hickory group. So just thinking about like where do we need to be after a disturbance such as a timber harvest or a blowdown or an insect outbreak that would be pretty severe and remove most of the trees within a particular stand, we need to be establishing around 400 kind of saplings at that kind of 20 to 35 year window. And so this map just basically shows the location of those 2,000 forest inventory analysis plots that we used to give you a general sense of how they overlap with our current forest and ecoregions in the state. So this protocol also that they use, they had basically 3 different security definitions based on whether or not it met the objective. So basically, failure is assigned to a plot when the advanced reproduction is less than the target objective, and it's pretty imminent that there's going to be a regeneration failure and full stocking would not be met. Insecure is where maybe the objective is not going to be met, but it's relatively close. And then secure has sufficient regeneration above those objectives. And so this is the results that basically that we found. And so kind of overall within New York State, we found that only about 16% of the plots had sufficient regeneration that they would be secure and could recover from a disturbance. So the inverse of that is around about 54% of the plots did not have any, sufficient advanced regeneration to basically be able to recover from a disturbance. And so as we break that out into forest type group, so in our northern hardwood group, which is the predominant forest type in the Catskills, around 45% of the plots did not have sufficient regeneration and are potentially insecure and at risk of failure. Whereas the Oak Hickory group across New York State, it was 68%. So much higher in that Oak Hickory group, predominantly found within the kind of Hudson Valley. And so this is how that is depicted across New York State. Failure is basically shown in red and orange. High reliability of failure, where we felt like the data was really where we were pretty confident in the data that those stands did not have sufficient regeneration, is in red. Moderate reliability in orange. And then secure is basically in green, and insecure in this yellow to light green color. So you can see that within kind of the Southern Catskills, Hudson Valley, basically those forests are at risk of regeneration failure if we had a large insect outbreak, potentially after timber harvest, without some type of intervention to help regeneration. As we get into the Catskills, forests are kind of insecure to regeneration failure, whereas in the Adirondacks, larger portion of the forest are secure. What I haven't really talked about here is the composition of this regeneration. So that varies quite a bit as well. I'm not going to be talking about that so much today in relation to this data set. We have some of that information, but I'll just note that a large portion, around 30 to 40% of our understory kind of seedlings and saplings in New York State are unfortunately beech and will be impacted by beech leaf disease. So as we redo this analysis, that potentially, these results will change as we see, potentially beech being understory, being abundant in the Catskills and then the Adirondacks as well. So I'm going to pause there, John. Any questions? I know that was a lot of information. Any questions on this forest regeneration status and the security indicator that we applied?
Chris, would you mind just repeating that statistic about beech in the understory?
Yeah, so beech, so where I would, so I can send you, there's a couple different data sets in that regards. So in 2010, when we did our analysis, we found that 30 to 40% of the regeneration in New York State is beech, and that varies by ecoregion. Another great source for that information is the U.S. Forest Service puts out a report every 5 years on the status of our forests. And so they have a whole section on forest regeneration, and they highlight how beech is the most abundant. species in our understory currently. So I can send those pieces around, as well as I do think in 2010, I do have a graph that I was working on, but didn't complete. So happy to kind of share this information with anybody who's interested. Does that answer your question, Meredith?
Sure. Yep.
Great.
Chris, it's Mark Wolf. I'm assuming the goal here when you say, it's secure, insecure, or failure, that the goal is sort of a healthy forest ecosystem, and because you're working with the Nature Conservancy, but maybe you went over this, but is the goal that, or is the goal that it can get harvested again for timber in however so many years? And is there a difference? Would there be a difference in those goals?
That's a great question, Mark. So the goal that I presented here in relation to the Forest Regeneration Security Index, this is based on stem density. So this is based on the ability of the forest to recover to kind of full stocking in the future. So that, our forests have similar stocking and biomass in the future moving forward. And so this is based on kind of like forestry stocking tables. So I think it's kind of two-part here is that we do want to see our forest kind of recovering to a stocking that we believe is acceptable for both, multiple goals. One could be potentially having, sustainable forest products in the future, but also as we think about kind of forest carbon or even potentially wildlife, these target objectives would apply. I didn't necessarily present any information on forest composition, so diversity. So as we think about forest regeneration and healthy forests for the future, certainly we're thinking about the diversity of that regeneration. So I didn't really talk about that in detail today. I do have some slides coming up to touch on that. So when I think about forest health, I would think about the density of seedlings, but also the diversity in species of those seedlings and potentially other aspects of as well. Does that get at your question, Mark?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for the great question. I appreciate that. All right, well, moving on. So why do we have this condition? So why is approximately 40 to 60% of our state at risk of regeneration failure? We don't have advanced regeneration sufficient to kind of recover from a disturbance. Some of the challenges that I've outlined here, and they're not mutually exclusive. And that is one of our biggest challenges is that in large portions of the state, there's high deer herbivory, as well as many of you know, there's invasive competing vegetation. And the challenge with forest pests and pathogens. So we've already experienced a major outbreak of emerald ash borer, killing many of our ash trees and disturbing the canopy. Hemlock woolly adelgid has moved its way across large parts of the state. And as John's pointing out, beech leaf disease is kind of the emerging threat that we expect, relatively high mortality of a dominant species within the next 5 to 10 years. And then lastly, climate change leading to kind of shifts in the habitat. So one of the things that I'm most concerned about, and seedlings especially, are very susceptible to drought. So as we see our springs potentially becoming drier and maybe summers wetter, it's really that variability in precipitation that can really impact our understory vegetation potentially. And so really it's all of these factors really coming together to be kind of a challenge. It's not just high deer herbivory, but it's high deer herbivory in combination with competing vegetation, invasive plants, and pests and pathogens that are really challenging our forests to be resilient, recover, and be healthy into the future. And so I just want to take a quick kind of sidebar in regards to kind of deer impacts as one of the, what I think of one of the kind of drivers of regeneration failure. But I suggest that everybody kind of take a look at the deer management plan that DEC released in 2021. So this plan goes from 2021 till 2030. And so if you take a look at Appendix B, this was kind of a sea change in this first time that DECs really utilized these forest regeneration indices to drive their deer management goals and setting their deer management objectives. It used to be citizen task force that would make these decisions within deer wildlife management units. And so this new process is how DEC is making their decisions. We provided comments the Nature Conservancy did on this process. The regeneration kind of index that they used, completed by Miller, I'm not completely sure it was appropriate in this use. We had some great discussions, but I was happy to see them using an index. So basically, we found, if you look at the Catskill aggregated wildlife management unit here, this index found basically, no debt or low problem. And so our data kind of didn't show that. So their index was a slightly different and is at a slightly different scale. Utilizing other information, they did kind of tease out that kind of regeneration is likely vulnerable in that unit, which is shown here in yellow. And then the deer impact potentially being low, which again, I'm not completely sure of, but I appreciate the index and the application of science and data. And so how that information is carried through then is that basically within that wildlife management unit aggregate here that we see within the Catskills, they found that the vulnerability was low based on their index. And that when they did a survey of the, population of people within the Catskills, they basically, found that they thought the deer populations should stay the same. Although I would say there's probably not a significant difference between the number of percent of people that were calling for a decrease in deer impact and deer abundance. So anyways, where they ended up, so they have this data for each unit for these targets, they felt that in this unit, it was basically maintain the status quo in the deer population and to monitor with the Avid protocol. So I'm not sure what they're doing now that Avid's kind of transitioning and is no longer going to be funded. But I just want to share this this with you because I think it's great that they're applying this data. Somehow, some of the conclusions about maintaining deer population in each unit, I'm not sure those are the conclusions that I would come to, but. So basically moving on. So as we think about all of these challenges and how they're interrelated, we kind of set out to do an on-the-ground study with New York City DEP. I worked with Meredith and Todd Baldwin, the forester with Ashokan. So we really had ambitious goals about how to think about setting up a kind of project to evaluate the impact of deer herbivory on tree seedling density, height growth, and diversity, and looking at a number of other different kind of like questions. So today I'm only going to really be looking at density, seedlings, and height growth in relation to deer herbivory within a fenced area, but we also looked at a number of other things as well. then I'm happy to share these information. And I think we have an upcoming field trip to this site. So what we basically did, we had it basically came down to as a demonstration site. We really didn't have enough samples for it to be like a full research protocol, but we basically looked at two different kind of areas. A forest stand in Sand Hill and a Plank Road. Meredith led a barberry treatment and multiflora rose treatment before these timber harvests were conducted. There was a timber harvest in 2014 and 2015 to remove the ash that was infested with emerald ash borer. That was like around 10 years ago, which is, always pretty interesting to think about time. So about 35% of the basal area was removed. And then we basically fenced in an exclosed area of about 2.5 acres, and then had an open area as well. And then within these blocks, we basically collected data on seedlings and saplings and other vegetation data and 60 2-meter square plots per block. So we had 60 plots in this block and we had 60 plots in the open area. And those plots were 2 meters squared in those areas. And we compared multiple different variables. So this is basically the results of the tree seedling density by height class and by year. And these graphs are basically showing different height classes of seedlings, so 5 to 30 centimeters, ranging up to greater than 150 centimeters. Basically, the line graph here is basically showing the different sites and exclosures. So basically, the green and purple are the Sand Hill site, and then red and blue is Plank Road. And so within Sand Hill, we really didn't, it was a different type of site, so we really didn't see influence across density and height class growth across the time period or kind of the size classes. There was the same relationship inside and outside the fence. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about that here in a couple slides. But at Plank Road, we did see a pretty substantial divergence. So at Plank Road, the blue is the exclosed area and the red is the open area. And so what we saw over time here in the smaller seedlings, initially in 2016, there was the same number of small seedlings, but in the exclosure, that decreased and they stayed the same though in the outside due to deer herbivory. So what we find if we jump down here to the seedlings that are greater than 1.5 meters or around 6 feet tall, we see a substantial increase in the kind of that sapling size class, which there was very little of that size class in 2016, where we did not see that in the open kind of area. So essentially there was at Plank Road, there was a substantial impact on the density of seedlings. And this can be shown in this photo here, just be showing the dense regeneration that was very difficult to even walk through. A majority of that was black birch, but the density of those kind of saplings was much higher in the exclosed area. And if we look at kind of species richness and diversity, we found that basically within the kind of the larger kind of sapling side class, again, this is greater than like 3 feet tall or a meter. At Plank Road, there was a significant difference in both richness and diversity, but there was no difference found at that 2 meter square plot at Sand Hill. So one site we found at basically Plank Road, finding an impact on diversity and on density. So one thing that we kind of like, we were thinking about Sand Hill, I think that a big issue was that the plot sizes were just much too small. And so we put in basically belt transects across those blocks. And we did find that within the exclosed area that there was a significant higher number of saplings within those belt transects. So I think it was a question of our kind of our sample area. So we did find an effect between open and exclosed area. And we also found a significant impact to diversity as well. And so we did a statistical test using kind of the Shannon-Weiner diversity index. So basically found within the exclosed area, we had a higher diversity compared to the open area. So we think really it was these belt transects. And so it was really interesting to find that within the exclosed area, within these larger kind of sapling classes, like in the exclosed area, this was the only place that we were finding sugar maple and tulip poplar and oak species were in these exclosures. You basically can walk around in the unexclosed area and not find any of those species, only really finding black birch and white pine. So this really kind of leads me to think that these exclosures or how we think about excluding deer potentially could be kind of refugia for seedlings to kind of meet our diversity goals in the absence of a robust deer management program. So with that, I can probably take a quick question, John. I know we're quickly approaching running out of time here.
Sure, if anyone has a question. It's a lot of information to
It
digest.
is a tremendous amount of information and it's fairly heavy, and I apologize for
It's
that.
awesome work. It's great work though, Chris. Thanks. Does anyone have a question?
Hey, Chris, this is Callie. This is an extremely applied project and like this giant problem. And so anyway, so take my question with a total salt shaker if needed. Do you have any sense of how large the exclosure would need to be in this area to have sufficient propagation of seedlings from presumably the species that are surviving to be able to you were saying, can help meet diversity goals. It sort of depends on your goal, but if one of your goals is to just increase propagules, to help, improve the seed bank, how much space do you need for that to
Yeah, that's a
happen?
great question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Ideally, we would have large portions, a greater percentage of our forest meeting these diversity goals. But given the complexity of this issue, I guess what I'm proposing here, or this is a demonstration of basically small exclosures and how they might be a lifeboat of diversity or a refugia to maintain these species in our landscape in areas that are heavily impacted. But I think what you're proposing is a great kind of question for the future. And is this concept really even feasible or, impactful, I guess,
Well, it's almost sort of like how could it be scaled so that the increased propagules can be one of the tools, right, for maintaining that diversity.
That's exactly right. So, if we think about within these exclosures, if these are the only places that tulip poplar is regenerating, potentially
Right.
we could think about like, well, that's a species moving into the landscape, potentially northward. Should we be trying to kind of promote its presence? So I don't know. I think it's a great question though. I haven't really given it sufficient thought, but I think we should think about it into the future.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
And so one of the things John asked me to kind of look at is implication to kind of forest carbon sequestration. And I would just say that we did two studies. One of my colleagues, Brittany Winke, is on the call today, and we worked with a researcher looking at kind of this question. I also worked with researchers at University of Massachusetts Amherst. So basically what we're finding is that generally, it depends on the extent of the disturbance and what species are kind of recovering. Smaller disturbances, we really didn't find an effect. So I would just say that at this point, it's somewhat uncertain and needs future kind of research. And so I just want to touch base on just kind of a few kind of opportunities for working in the future. One of the primary programs that I work on right now is called the Family Forest Carbon Program. And I've been working on this for the last kind of 4 years to make that available to New York family forest landowners. We almost have around 90 landowners enrolled, totaling around 1,200 acres in New York State over the last 3 years. And so it really provides potentially resources and some of the tools to help landowners potentially restore their forest and establish forest regeneration. And so why do I think this program, potentially is important is just because 57% of our forest in New York are owned by family forest landowners. So it's really critical that we, get in touch with those landowners, help them develop management plans. Very few of them are working with natural resource professionals or foresters, only about 20%, and fewer have forest management plans. So the Family Forest Carbon Program provides those landowners with the option of 2 practices. So if they enroll, they can enroll in Enhancing Your Woodland, which provides kind of a sustainable payment over a 20-year period of time that they sign up for. And this allows for management, so thinning, group selection, which you could promote forest regeneration. And then we also provide a growing older forest practice, which defers harvest to allow trees to kind of get larger over time and processes to develop. And so under the program, which I think would really be beneficial, is that this puts forest landowners in touch with a forester, provides them with technical assistance, provides them with a free management plan, access to a forester, and then income over time, which they could use to support practices to improve forest health, such as invasive plant treatments or setting up small deer exclosures. And so I think the Enhancing Your Woodland practice potentially could be right for some landowners where potentially where they're thinking about active forest management, which that funding could help to potentially do some kind of single tree selection, group selection harvest, and potentially establishing some deer exclosures within those areas. So this practice here has a short-term decrease in carbon at the kind of the stand scale, but carbon stocks recover over a 20-year period of time, but it does increase structural complexity and kind of opens up the canopy potentially to establish regeneration. So just some kind of final concluding thoughts. I know that was a lot of information and kind of a whirlwind. I was trying to figure out how much information to present, so I just figured I present everything I've worked on over the last 15 years, just about. But concluding thoughts, and based on the data that we've collected, New York forests are at risk of regeneration failure. So it's around 45 to 65% of our forest, depending on forest, type. And as others have kind of touched on, this is like a wicked problem. So there's like multiple different factors to take into consideration, both I would say biological factors, but as well as social factors too, like how people see this issue and what they are willing to kind of do. I do think that deer herbivory is kind of an overriding, kind of a significant factor affecting forest regeneration, diversity especially, and density. I think we're faced with some emerging challenges. I'm really concerned about beech leaf disease and potentially how that's going to even lead to greater mortality within our forest and open up growing space. So what's going to fill that growing space as more light is available? I do think that Family Forest Carbon Program can help, such as other programs like Regenerate New York and other programs potentially that the Watershed Out Council might have, or the Catskill Forest Association. I'm super excited about partnerships and collaborations like the CRISP Forest Regeneration Working Group, and kind of working with, you know, partners to improve collaboration, sharing of information in the future, and working to develop feasible solutions. So with that, John, that is the whirlwind that I have. Thank you so much.
That's a lot of great information, and I really appreciate that presentation. We gave you a really difficult, challenging goal, I guess, to cover all of this, but you did it in a great way, and there's a lot to absorb. I'm looking forward to looking more into this with the citations that you pointed out. Thanks, Chris. Any questions out there?
So yeah, happy to share any of the information that I presented, as well as other resources or potentially a talk in the future. So thanks to everyone for attending and your patience, and as I presented these, you know, lengthy and complex data sets.
I think this is great. I think it would be great. Maybe we could do a deeper dive into some of this at some point in the future when you're ready for it.
That'd be
There's so
great.
much.
And certainly too, to recognize there are other people that are smarter than I am and that have been thinking about this for a long period of time. And, you know, certainly all the great, you know, people on the ground that have been making observations over, you know, 30, 40, 50 years about what's going on. So I think I'm excited about the opportunity to collaborate and share information.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah, are there any other questions? I'll give people another opportunity, and then Brittany, you put in an update on the number of acres that are enrolled in the chat.
Yeah, Chris has been leading the effort, not just in New York, but across the northeastern United States, to coordinate foresters and the Nature Conservancy, the American Forest Foundation, on the Family Forest Carbon Program. So that 11,500 acres in New York, I mean, that represents, I think, huge growth since the program only opened to the whole state in the fall of 2023. And so, yeah, Chris deserves a lot of credit for those big numbers.
Thanks,
Congrats,
Chris.
Chris.
That's very kind of you to say. And Brittany works with me on the Family Forest Carbon program, as well as Jack Lampman, who joined today, as well as David Richardson. So thanks for all my team and people for showing up today and supporting. But just to note, the Family Forest Carbon program, I think, is one possible, you know, program, as I mentioned, Regenerate New York, but then also New York's 480A program. So there's been some kind of like new revisions in regards to that program. So forest regeneration really is called out within 480A for the first time. So all those landowners are going to be needing to think about, if they haven't already been thinking about forest regeneration. So I think that's a potential opportunity to get in touch with those landowners as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. Zach has a question for you in the chat. Approximately how many landowners does that 11,500 acres represent?
Yeah, that great question, Zach. We're happy to share that information. Again, thanks for showing up. It's around, I think, 92. I don't know, Brittany, I don't know if you have the number in front of us, but
Yeah, I just looked it up, 87, close enough.
Yeah, off. I'm like always off in like a margin of, you know, a error of 10. But yeah, so I think, you know, what we're looking to explore right now is just, you know, can we work with those landowners on some of these challenges?
Great. Well,
Thanks,
it's a great
John. Thanks,
program.
everyone.
Thank you, Chris. I guess we'll move on to the next session of the agenda. It was great. That was great talk, Chris, and you and your team are doing great work. So we really appreciate you presenting it here. The next part of the meeting, we wanted to go over some of the great work that's being done by the different working groups that were established. So just to go back to where Chris asked me about the forest regeneration working group, all of the working groups, I think to some extent were came up in the group concept mapping as ideas of things to work on. And we've been struggling with some of them, how to work on them over the last few years since we did that group concept mapping. So the steering committee, the CRISP steering committee, decided to establish some working groups that could work on each of these ideas specifically to try to move them forward and figure out where we want to go and make some progress on these different ideas. And actually, I could share. Try to share my screen here to get back to the agenda.
Yeah, the forest regeneration working group was the first one up for an update.
Yep. Yeah. So if you want to, I'm going to offer like anybody in the working groups could give an update. And if anybody wants to jump in on the forest regeneration, then they can do that.
I can start us off.
Yes, thank you.
So the forest regeneration working group has met several times. Chris's presentation today for you was one of our objectives. We wanted to share more information about some of the challenges facing regeneration to get everyone in the partnership up to speed. We've also been talking about pulling together some of the resources that Chris highlighted right at the end there on a webpage devoted to landowners with questions and concerns about invasive species and forest regeneration. And so that many of these working groups, one of the outcomes will be web resources and coordinating partners sharing information through the website. We're also doing some follow-up now on a survey that was sent out to partners to complete on forest regeneration perceptions. John's compiling that information into some resources that can be shared. Those survey questions highlighted some top concerns as well as some issues that didn't seem to be a concern to many of our partners, but maybe should be more of a concern. And one of those was beech leaf disease that was ranked lower than we expected to see. And so we hope to do some work over the coming year to really delve deeper into what those impacts from beech leaf disease will be on the region, because it is somewhat of an unknown as it is a new species coming in. We also are planning on June 11th to do a field tour of some of these sites that you've heard about in Chris's presentation, the deer exclosures that DEP has installed on our property around the Ashokan, as well as the Ashokan Rail Trail restoration project that John mentioned earlier, and hopefully some other stops along the tour that will round out our next partners meeting. So we hope you'll all join us for that. Anything else I'm leaving out?
I think that covers the things I was thinking of. Does anyone else have anything on the forest regeneration working group? And I think that Chris's presentation helped to spread information about that and also to point out a lot of challenges that we have with forest regeneration.
Yeah, I guess I'd just say I'm like super excited about the field trip. You know, I mean, so I think that there's not too many places that you can go where there's like a project that's been like 10 years to see what happened over that period of time. So like as we think about these different interventions and like partnering, I think one of the things that we talked about are like trying to gather that information about different, projects or interventions that have been done to improve forest regeneration and kind of address these challenges. So like there's the Frost Valley deer exposure, there's one at the Suslau Model Forest. So just trying to coalesce that information into some learnings is, I think, really exciting.
So we want to move on to local government. That's the next working group.
Sure, I can give that update.
Sorry, Meredith.
That's all right. So we have some exciting developments on our working with local government group. We are looking to develop relationships with local conservation commissions, planning boards, and other groups to identify potential training opportunities and educational materials to share with them, increasing their knowledge of invasive species and their ability to incorporate best practices into their work. The working group has developed an outline for an approximately 3-hour-long training that will incorporate information about IMAP invasives, local invasive species of concern, different regulations, how to use IMAP and other tools to develop a protocol for a site plan review, and recommending some different protocols that they can incorporate into their day-to-day work. We're hoping to pilot this training with one community this year and expand it beyond that in the future with some feedback. We've worked to develop a simple brochure that we can use to spread the word about these basic concepts and resources available to municipal officials and planning board members. And John and I were invited to go to the Invasive Species Council meeting coming up at the end of next month to share this information with the council agencies and see if we can build on this effort to incorporate invasive species into more reviews for different agencies within the state and their trainings that they provide for local municipal officials. So a lot coming. We've been coordinating with IMAP invasives, and it's exciting to see some potential ways to improve on our relations with local governments throughout the region and the state.
Definitely. Yeah, that's really exciting. So unless anybody has anything else about that, then we move on to internships. Probably Meredith, you might be the person to talk about that.
Sure. So the internship working group's goal was to support the development of the next generation of invasive professionals through coordination of regional invasive species internship opportunities and building academic partnerships. So we decided to build off of a model that was developed by the Lower Hudson Prism, which was to reserve a date in the middle of the season for an intern-based partner gathering that has been scheduled for July 15th. We've worked, Donna Vogler has reached out to SUNY Oneonta's career and internship person, Christy Funch. So she'll be our keynote speaker, and we're filling out our agenda now with additional speakers, groups that can have tabling, as well as workshop activities for young professionals and interns working in the region. And it's going to be a networking job fair kind of event. So if you know of anyone who might be interested, or if you are interested in participating in that event, please reach out. And then, as Sammy mentioned in her introduction, she has been reaching out to some of the campus coordinators at colleges and universities throughout the region to help fill in some more information on internship opportunities between sharing partner internships, as well as connecting with students who are interested in working in this field. So really exciting to make those connections. And if any partners have or know of internship opportunities in the Catskills, reach out to John and Sammy to get those posted on the website. Those are the few that were identified are up there now. There is a webpage for that.
Yeah, and there's a Google form on the website, and there's also I don't know if Sarah could post the direct link in the chat, but it'd be great if we got more people could contribute more of what's available for the summer. Thank you, Sarah. She got it up already. Great. So yeah, we'd like to be able to share that information, make it easier for people who are looking for positions to be able to find them. So thanks for that. Anything else with internships? Otherwise, I could start on success stories and ask other people to join. So with success stories, we're collecting information. Meredith completed a kind of a template that we could use for sharing success stories with invasive species management. There might be a tendency to be overwhelmed by some of the things that we have to deal with, but we've had a lot of successes, and we have contact with a lot of people who have contributed a lot over the years to help us to better understand and manage invasive species. So Meredith's story was about the fish hook water flea and the anglers that reported that originally. There's a lot of those stories of people, of people that have, they either see that there's something that looks a little different and they're able to report it, or they know what it is and are able to report it to the right place so that the people that need to know about it and can do something about it. So we really appreciate everybody that is able to take this information that we share and to put it into action. Plus there's some invasive species where we've done a lot of work on and have made a real impact over the years. I always bring up Dan's work with giant hogweed in the Catskills, and how thanks to him taking the lead, we've really made an impact on the population of giant hogweed in our region. So if anybody has other success stories that they would like to contribute, or just ideas that they would like to submit, you could just let us know. You could send me an email and we could talk about that. There's a number of people that we still need to reach out to, that we want to develop those stories and be able to share that information through our website, on social media. There's lots of different outlets that we could do that. Did you, Meredith, or anyone want to add anything to that success story working group?
Just that we're hoping to highlight these individuals on a rotating basis across the web and social media to really draw people in and allow them to connect with other people working in the area, so that it's a more personal, relatable issue for people.
Thanks. The Mile a Minute Stiltgrass Working Group, Meredith?
Sure. So this group was formed to develop best management practices based on current research and partner experience for Mile a Minute and Stiltgrass. We are working on coming up with some strategies to catalog partner projects on Stiltgrass and Mile a Minute to share these results among the partners. So if anyone has any management projects that they've completed that they would be willing to share their results with us, that would be great. We're going to compile that information and get it back out to partners. We're also working to do some research and gather resources on the different restoration options in treatment areas. And the Lower Hudson Prism just released a really nice guide on BMPs for non-chemical control of a number of invasive species. And so mile-a-minute and stiltgrass were included. They've worked with Hudsonia to pull together a whole host of resources on that information. And Shannon Jenkins in our working group has pulled together a number of other publications. So we're pulling this information together, and we'll try and get more information out on the web. The other piece is we're talking about developing Catskill specific test plots to try out some of these strategies that have been identified in the literature to see if there are any different issues that would make some strategies work better than others in the Catskills. So we're going to identify some sites, and we're looking for some academic partnerships to work with to conduct this research on these test plots. There's a new working group that's forming out of Cornell to connect researchers with land managers on invasive species. So this is one of the projects that we're going to bring to that group to see if they would have interest in partnering with us on that. So that's coming up in September, and we'll keep working toward getting something going. But again, if you have sites where you've been doing siltgrass or mile-a-minute management, let us know.
And construction best management practices.
I'll keep going.
Okay, it's you, Meredith.
Okay, so this group was designed to develop or adopt best management practices for spread prevention on construction equipment and fill. We wanted to build off of some work that had already happened in the Slilo Prism, where they've been exploring how to develop a program for certified clean gravel. We've been working to compile some of our agency or organization protocols that we have for construction. So New York State DOT, Chris Gilbert had some protocols that were able to be shared out. I'm working on getting some of our DEP protocols out to share, and getting folks different things to pull from, including the Work Clean Go resources that are available through the North American Invasive Species Management Association, compiling all of that on the web again to have that all in one place. And we've also started to look into what it would take to get a certified clean fill or gravel program for the Catskills. Tom Algeier has been working on developing a proposal to do this more statewide, but we're hoping to get a little more involved with some of the other regional groups, the prisms, and put together a more comprehensive approach for certifying the clean gravel or fill. We found out from Region 3 DEC Mines and Reclamation that there are quite a few gravel mines within the CRISP region. And so John's been doing some work to connect with those mines and see what practices are in place and what interest and receptiveness they would have to becoming certified, which has to do with clearing invasive plants from the vicinity of the mine to make sure that no seeds or other propagules are getting into the material before it's distributed. So we're trying to do some of that groundwork now to see if we can build this up into a project at the same time that NASMA, the North American Invasive Species Management Association, is trying to ramp up participation in this certified clean program that they have.
Great, thank you. If anyone on the call has any information that they would like to provide to any of the working groups, that would be really appreciated. If anybody wants to join any of the working groups, I think it's pretty open that we could have more people at the meeting, some more ideas. more capacity to do some of these things that need to get done, and have been, as we started out the conversation, they were ranked as things that we thought all of us as a group, stakeholders and people here thought were really important to do, and ones that we thought that we could make progress on. So it's really important that we try to chip away at these things over time. So I would just encourage people to reach out to us if they have ideas or if they want to jump into any of these groups. So our next section is partner updates and announcements. I didn't hear anyone specifically that wanted to give updates, so I'll open the floor to anybody that wants to jump in. I assume, Meredith, you have something, but I don't want to put people on the spot.
I can briefly share a couple updates. We're in the process right now of hiring our summer interns. Interviews are happening next week, and so we'll be bringing on 3 or 4 summer interns to work with us again. We've been doing a lot of work to promote the hemlock woolly adelgid biocontrol work that the New York State Hemlock Initiative has been spearheading. So we have a number of hemlock projects that are ongoing, including winter mortality monitoring. So we'll be going out on Monday to collect from trees throughout the Catskills twigs that get sent off to the lab at Cornell, where they can assess the winter mortality of the hemlock woolly adelgid, which helps them to better understand areas that are primed for biocontrol predator releases. And then we're also collecting and containerizing samples to assess the predator success and spread from the areas where the releases have already happened. And so we'll be keeping some office pets, as someone said, in our containers in our office, and seeing what comes out of those. And Chris Benincasa, our field technician, has been doing some hemlock stand plots to assess hemlock mortality as part of the Lingering Hemlock Project. That's been ongoing across the region. So a lot of hemlock work, and we're gearing up for another great field season. And our weevil order has gone in for the mile-a-minute weevils that we will be releasing once again at the Honk Lake restoration site, where we had mile-a-minute come in down in the southern edge of the region. Thanks.
Yeah, great work. Thanks. Anyone else have anything they want to bring up about the upcoming season, things they want us to know about that are going on?
This is Tom Algeier. So I have one little brief announcement. Our supervisor, Frank Buccello, who covered part of the CRISP region in the kind of the southern end of the Hudson Valley there, has retired, and his duties have been shifted over to our Region 2 supervisor, Mario Theotokis. However, his staff will still remain in position, and shouldn't have any interruption to service to anybody in that area. But just wanted to be aware that there's a change in supervisor for that area. Don't know if they're going to backfill or if they're just going to combine those 2 regions. They haven't made that decision yet, but if a new supervisor is put in place, I'll update you again. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Tom. I guess I had a question for you, Tom, regarding spotted lanternfly trapping. Is that getting cut back, or is that happening this year?
Yeah, we don't have the budget to support any spotted lanternfly trapping. We do have a few traps left in reserve that may be available if people need parts or replacements. But we have no budget whatsoever for trapping or for outreach material. So we won't be able to provide any of that really, other than the few traps we have kind of in storage. However, if prison staff or partners want to continue on trapping with the traps they have, the data from that would be greatly appreciated. So you can continue to use those traps, providing they're still structurally, sound. But yeah, unfortunately, that's the financial situation we're in.
Yeah, sorry to hear that, Tom, but thanks for the information, and we'll see what we can do on trapping.
Much appreciated.
Thanks.
And John, I'll just give a yep.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, at OCCA, in addition to working on the project with the CRISP funds, we have a new volunteer coordinator who's going to be helping out a lot with getting folks up on board for some of our summer programs. We're also working now with the Cooperstown Lions Club. They're doing an Adopt a Pond, which we managed to convince them to adopt part of Goodyear Lake that has that long-standing water chestnut problem. So we're going to get them in there on a regular basis to do those removals. And we're working on getting folks to do some sort of shoreline monitoring over at Canadrigo and Otsego Lakes for harmful algal blooms as well as potential invasives popping up. So just there you go. And yep, that's it.
Thank you, Jeff. Great. Anyone else have anything they want to update us on? Or have questions about anything that we've been talking about, or? I don't see or hear anyone. So, with that, I did want to mention before we break, our next meeting's going to be on June 11th. So if you could hold the date, that's the date that Meredith had mentioned about doing a field trip. I think Chris or Meredith had mentioned that we were doing a field trip to look at regeneration. So I think it's going to be a great trip. We'll probably have a partners meeting in the morning. Looks like it will probably be at the Catskill Visitor Center. So I expect it would be 10 to noon in person at the Catskill Visitor Center in Mount Tremper. So keep an eye open for that. I hope we can have people at our meeting and get people out in the field to look at some of the actual on the ground, some of the information that Chris was talking about. So we have a lot of great things coming up. Like I said, we'll be posting those on our events page on our website. So keep an eye open for that. And unless anybody has anything else, I'll thank you again, Chris, for that great information, that great presentation. If it's okay with you, we're gonna post this recording online. It will be available on our website and on YouTube, so people can look back at it and try to absorb more of the information that you presented. I know I'll probably take another look at it. So again, thank you, Chris, and thanks everybody for participating today. Really appreciated all the information that got shared, and it's between Chris and the working groups. So there's a lot going on, and I hope everybody is looking forward to a good season. Thank you all.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, hope you have a good day. Take care.
Thanks, Chris. Awesome presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.